Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. A lot of people leave comments on my comic book videos talking about how there is going to be a resurgence in the comic book business. And these people basically don't really see the big picture as related to entertainment the way that I do, as someone who has studied the entertainment industry for over 25 years and someone who has worked in the publishing business for over 15 years, running his own publishing business and spending 20 in the entire publishing industry. And when it comes to comic books today, comic books are not considered to be an asset to the owners of the big two comic companies, Marvel Comics and DC Comics, and even small comic publishers like Image or Dynamite or Boom. No, when it comes to comic book publishing is not considered to be an economic asset to many of these businesses anymore, and the business for most comic book companies is no longer about sales like it was back in the 1980s and the 1990s before the Telecom Act of 1996 wound up conglomerating American media. And when the Telecom Act of 1996 wound up conglomerating American media by deregulating American media, making it possible for corporations to go out here and own more than one TV station, one radio station, one newspaper or magazine, what this did was lead to the consolidation of American media and the further commodification of American media to the point where we only have 6 major media companies basically running most of the media, and many of the companies that used to be independent, like Marvel and DC, and some of the other small independent comic book companies, basically became assets of these corporations, and as they became assets of these corporations, this basically changed the way that these publishing companies went out here and did business. Now, in the past, the way publishing companies mostly made their money was by going out here and publishing comic books, and as they published comic books, they really needed to go out here and generate sales on their books in order to be able to not only pull a profit, but also maintain their business and maintain the value and the wealth value of their intellectual properties. However, after the Telecom Act of 1996 was passed, what happened with many of these companies is that as they wound up conglomerating as related to American media, they no longer really needed to see a value in publishing comic books anymore because they didn't get their value from the sales of comic books. No, they got their value from looking to license the intellectual properties that they owned and be able to turn those intellectual properties into value assets that of like movies, TV shows, and merchandise licensing such as action figures, statues, and t-shirts and things like that. That's how most of the corporations make most of their money these days on comic book characters. They don't make their money on generating sales of comic books today. And as a result, what's happening with the comic book industry is that their main focus is on that licensing, merchandising, and looking to turn these IPs into adaptations. And the publishing business in and of itself is basically seen as a loss leader these days. It's basically seen as a way to basically mitigate the cost of being able to go out and make these intellectual properties into the licensing and merchandising juggernauts that they make most of their money on, and they'll basically sit there and take a loss on publishing comics because they see a greater value in the trademarks for most of these characters. Because when it comes to these publishing comics, this is basically done for one reason, and that reason is to preserve the trademarks of the catalog of over 3,000 to 5,000 characters over at Marvel and at DC. And for other companies like Dynamite, Boom, and Image, this is also done basically to again preserve those trademarks and those copyrights, because under US trademark law, you have to use an intellectual property once every 10 years in order to continue to ensure that you can continue to hold the rights to that trademark. Otherwise, what will happen is that trademark will go out of print and basically wind up dead, and someone else can go out here and try to possibly grab that trademark. So what companies do is they're going to go out here and look to go out here and maintain those trademarks at the cheapest route, and the cheapest route for many of these corporations that as related to conglomerated American media to be able to preserve their trademarks is by going out here and publishing comics that they know will not sell, and basically they will take a loss on these books, but they're willing to take that small loss on those books in order to profit as related to licensed merchandise, such as those action figures, such as the t-shirts, and other licensed adaptations such as video games, animated TV series, and live action movies and TV shows, where they can go out here and generate higher revenue streams for themselves rather than sit there and take the losses on these published comics. They would rather go out here and sell and license the assets that they have and use that to make their money. And that's why comics in and of themselves are just have no value at this point to these businesses, again, outside of those trademarks and the copyrights that they basically own as corporate assets. Now, because these companies basically see these properties as corporate assets and see them as properties that they commodify, what they're doing today as related to preserving those trademarks is going out here and just basically leaving editorial alone, having no real standards as related to publishing, because publishing is no longer a business for most modern comic publishers anymore. No, publishing over at these companies basically is there to just be a placeholder business for the trademarks, a placeholder business that they go out here and use to maintain their trademarks and do this cheap as possible. This is why we've seen page rates basically plummet on comics today, because most comic book companies, again, what they do is go out here and recruit these talents from Tumblr and all of these different websites, because they know they can get these people for cheap. And since they can only get these people for maybe $50 to $110 a page for a comic script, or maybe $150 to $100 a page, sometimes even $90 a page for some art, they can basically keep their costs low as related to going out here and printing this material for cheap, because they're going to go out here and again look to just do this to just maintain the trademarks. And because they're just looking to maintain the trademarks, this is why standards have fallen in comic publishing. The standards have fallen because when it comes to the business, they don't really see the business as an asset. No, they see the business just as a way to, again, to maintain the trademarks. And this is why all sorts of comics are being published by dysfunctional folks in editorial who are basically hired again for cheap. These people are basically hired for $37,000, $40,000 a year, when in actual trade publishing, if they were serious about, again, learning the craft of publishing, these same people could go out here and work at a trade house, again, get those connections with a trade house, and eventually go out here and then start again making those connections, and eventually they would become an agent. And as they would become a literary agent, they would get 10% off the top of the books that they would go out here and sell to a trade house That's how it's usually done. A lot of people start out as editors at publishing houses and start working on acquisitions, and then as they're working on acquisitions, eventually they make enough connections to be able to get books sold and be able to get that 10% off in advance and be able to continue to get 10% off royalties. So they wind up becoming agents representing different authors. So that's usually what happens in trade publishing. However, when it comes to comics, again, a lot of the people that they get are from the bottom of the barrel because mainly corporate doesn't see it as a top business anymore. No, corporate basically sees comic book publishing, again, as a means to an end. And because they see comic book publishing as a means to an end, they don't care how much money they lose on these comic book series. They don't care how many times they get rebooted and relaunched. And they don't care because their money is mostly being made, again, off the merchandising of action figures, t-shirts, video games, and other things like movies and TV shows. That's where most of their money is being made. And when it comes to comics, again, this is where their money is made on that licensing and merchandising. So they basically don't care about the printed published comics. They don't care about them at all. But there is a contingent of comic fans who basically still sit there believing that there's going to be some sort of resurgence in the comic book business. But as someone, again, who knows the entertainment business, I'm here to tell you there's not going to be any resurgence because no one really cares about comic books anymore. No one really cares about comics as related to corporate business. No, what they care about, again, is being able to have that gold mine of characters they can go out here and, again, use to basically commodify into intellectual properties. They care about commodifying these characters into intellectual properties, and for them, the floppy books are just a cost of business. The floppy 32-page comic is just a cost of business as related to being a loss leader for them because they're willing to take the loss on the comics that will lead to them getting better sales as related to other merchandise. And for them, again, publishing comics is not a sales business the way it is for many of their trade publishing books. No, for their trade publishing books at these corporations, the intellectual properties have a higher value. They have a higher value because the intellectual properties, again, are basically assets that can be, again, sold, and again, assets that can be sold that they can make money off of and have that higher value because, again, the author in and of themselves, again, is somebody that can go out here and produce property that has value, but they already, because that person already partially owns that property. But when it comes to the comic book characters, they don't have that value because, again, they already own that intellectual property, and that intellectual property can be whatever they want as related to their business. They've already made that money, but you can't explain this to many comic fans who still think that there's still some value to this business. They still think that there's some value to the comic book business, and it can come back, but clearly, when I look at the business infrastructure, there's no way it can come back because right now, the median age for a comic book reader is 50 years old and getting older, and the whole infrastructure for comics is basically destroyed at this point because when you only have 300 stores, you basically don't have the infrastructure to be able to get those comics distributed every month to get in the hands of 330 million people all across the country. Now, I know Dollar Tree is basically having these stands in their stores for comics for $1.25, but most of that material is old printed material, so that basically shows, again, how little care that DC Comics has as related to its business and how little care Warner Brothers Discovery has for its business. It's basically looking to use Dollar Tree as a way to sell its remainders, which is what we call in the publishing industry books that are printed but did not sell. Usually these are sold at airports and discount stores. So when it comes to those comics at the Dollar Tree, they really don't have much value to the publisher. Yes, they'll put them in the store, but the whole thing is they're just looking to get rid of those remainders, because then that really shows how bad the business has been doing, that you have Dollar Tree selling remainders and not fresh stock. Because if comics were really serious about going to Dollar Tree, you would see recent issues of books, not old books like DC Rebirth and old DC Convergence books at Dollar Tree. No, you would see brand new books as part of the dawn of DC. You would see recent issues on the shelf, and you would see boxes or racks set up to sell recent issues. So when I look again at the comic book business, again, it's a dying business, and a dying business because it's not really focused again on publishing as related to publishing recent material and distributing it in a serious manner. No, what's happening here with comics is it's again a dying business. It's a dying business that's basically out here, and many people don't really see it because they don't understand the business of publishing. They don't understand that again, when a publisher is serious, they're focused on sales of actual books. They're focused on the sale of an actual book and getting actual books to access to customers all across the globe. They're looking to again reach those customers with first run material almost immediately. But the mainstream comic book business, its main focus is as related to new material, basically again preserving trademarks and looking to sell reprinted material in many of these trade paperbacks and omnibuses. Again, this is how they make most of their money as related to published printed material. They make their money as related to back material, not front material. And if you're making money on back material, that means that your business is basically a dead at this point. I mean, it's not like manga where they're constantly making fresh new material and there's an anticipation for fresh new material. I mean, when you look at manga, it's basically distributed in retail sites such as Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com, and also distributed in places like Asian shops and other bookstores. I mean, you can find manga everywhere, and the reason why you can find manga everywhere is because the publisher is focused on sales, and because the publisher is focused on sales, you can find that material, and you can find it readily available with fresh new material. And the reason for that is because the median age, again, of the manga reader is anywhere from 8 years old and up. And since they have multiple genres of manga, you can find manga basically everywhere. And you can't say that about American comics, because when you look at American comic publishing, again, you don't see that focus on sales. And sadly, many people who are comic fans can't see the picture objectively as related to comic publishing. They can't see the big picture of comic publishing basically no longer being a valuable thing to most of the publishers. This is why, again, you see all of these incompetence as related to Marvel and DC's editorial, and you see the standards slipping at companies like Dynamite as related to their comics, where the comics just, again, the art isn't that great, because even though they do license comics like Gargoyles and many of the Disney books, again, this is just done to preserve the trademarks on these IPs so that the company can go out here and say, we actually still use these trademarks after 10 years. Because again, according to trademark law, and I'll repeat it once more for those who don't understand, again, trademark law says you have to use your characters once every 10 years in order for them to be considered to be relevant as related to your business. And if you don't use those trademarks, again, somebody can go out here and be able to go out here and make knockoffs. So in order to protect their trademark and IPs as related to being wealth building assets, what companies do is go out and look to, again, preserve those trademarks in the cheapest fashion. The cheapest fashion, whether it be going out here and publishing some comics, or going out here and making some action figures or some sort of thing. They just want, or making a t-shirt, something that will let people know, okay, this IP is still in use, it's still an asset to this business. And while a lot of us comic fans, again, have a love for comics, it's just another part of business for the entertainment industry that has been conglomerated since the Telecom Act of 1996. It's just another part of business, and these characters are no longer characters that we love and care about. They're just commodities and properties that they basically have out here and will put in what many call these social justice stories or other types of stories. Again, it doesn't matter to the CEOs of these corporations. The only thing that matters is that they preserve the trademarks and the copyrights. The only thing that matters is that they still hold rights to those assets, and they could care less about the comic fan, because losing the comic fan is just a small cost of business as related to their overall business of movies, TV, film, and other merchandising. Now, my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, is available on Lulu.com in paperback and Kindle format. It's also, and you can pick up a paper copy for the same price as the 2022 Kickstarter. And my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, is available on Kindle for just 99 cents, and you can get the paper copy in the book Esteem Blast from the Past, and you can find all the SJS Direct Universe books, such as the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my vampire novel, The Eternal Night, and my sorority novel, The Thetas, and my business novel, Recipe for Success. You can find those books and my men's issues books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft the Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Now available in paperback at e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.